Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're really happy to have you here tonight. My name is Susan Clark, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at the High. And before we begin our panel discussion tonight, I'd like to take a moment to recognize an organization that is very special to the High Museum, and that is the Fulton County Arts Council. Since the inception of the Fulton County Arts Council, the High Museum has been the recipient of very generous support each year. Currently, the Fulton County Arts Council, under the guidance of the Fulton County Commission, makes it possible for the High to provide free admission to Fulton County residents on the first Saturday of every month. And it is incredibly important, particularly during these challenging economic times, that this type of support help the museum be able to provide access to all people of Fulton County. And we have some special people here tonight representing the Fulton County Arts Council, and I'd like to recognize them. First of all, I would like to thank Commissioner Nancy Boxell, who could not be here tonight, for her ongoing support of the arts. We have here this evening Veronica Williams-Njoku, who is the Executive Director of the Fulton County Arts Council. And please stand, Veronica. And we also have here Charles Green, who is the Chair of Fulton County Arts Council, and I'd like to invite him up to say a few remarks.
Thank you, Susan. Since 1970, Fulton County has invested more than $100 million into the arts community, representing Georgia's largest public investment in culture. I believe that all Fulton County residents can be very proud of the results. Over the past 30 years, the development and expansion of the High Museum of Art has brought the world's spotlight to Atlanta many times. From the prestigious Rings exhibit during the Centennial Olympic Games to North America's first major exchange with the Louvre Museum, we do know how great we've got it here. The support of the Fulton County Commission has played an important role in the museum's growth and success. I do hope the next time you see your county commissioner, you'll let them know of your appreciation for their vision, courage, and commitment to culture. And let them know that art is very important to our community. Thank you.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Julian Cox. I'm the Curator of Photography here at the High. And it's very appropriate, really, that tonight's event should be framed by the Fulton County Commission because three presenters this evening are all residents of this city and of that county, and they all ply their trade here, and we're very lucky to have them. I think one of the reasons why we put this exhibition together, Road to Freedom, was to talk about the centrality of the civil rights history to the city of Atlanta and to this region. And tonight's participants are all part of that history, and they've been instrumental in helping me, as the curator of the show, put the whole thing together. So I'm really delighted that they're going to be sharing their knowledge and their background and their experience with us as an audience this evening. The format will be as follows. We'll begin with some remarks from Hank Klibanoff, the author of this Pulitzer Prize-winning publication that is available outside the auditorium, and Hank will be signing copies after tonight's event. In addition to Hank, we'll have remarks from Doris Derby, who is a photographer and educator in our community. And then leading a discussion will be Dr. Brett Gadsden from Emory University, another major stakeholder in this history in our city, and I will be chipping in as and where relevant. So I want to begin by introducing Hank Klibanoff. He is the managing editor for Enterprise at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and co-author of the publication that I just mentioned to you, which won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize for History. He's a native of Florence, Alabama, and grew up watching the evolution of race relations in the South in the 1950s and 1960s. He earned his bachelor's degree at Washington University in St. Louis and his master's degree in journalism at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois. He began his professional reporting career in 1972, and for most of the next several years was based in Jackson, Mississippi, and worked for newspapers on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and in the Delta. He later held positions as a reporter at the Boston Globe and the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he covered a wide range of stories. While in Philadelphia, for 6 years, he taught a course in journalism for the Urban Studies Department at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was also a fellow at the Freedom Forum's Media Studies Center at Columbia University. And it was in 2002 that he joined the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as a managing editor. In addition to serving in many volunteer capacities, he's a member of the board of directors of Vox Teen Communications, a non-profit youth development organization here in Atlanta that encourages and helps teenagers to develop skills and resources to express themselves on issues that are important to them. The teens produce a monthly newspaper that reaches almost 80,000 people, and they have a website that is Metro Atlanta's only uncensored citywide forum for expression, created by teens for teens. And just to mention again, the Race Beat was written by Hank, and his co-author is Gene Roberts, who was a former editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer and a former managing editor of the New York Times. And the book explores the news and editorial coverage of the civil rights movement in the South. And it looks at the impact and involvement of photojournalism, television, the black press, the northern press, and the southern liberal and segregationist press from the 1930s through the 1960s. So all of that being said, it was a fundamental guide for me as I went about my work putting this exhibition together. So please join me in welcoming Hank Klibanoff.
Thank you, Julian, and thank all of you for being here tonight. I'm sure many of you have been through the exhibit, but if you haven't, I insist that you do. Not right now. It's a phenomenal exhibit. You will see things you haven't ever seen before. I saw things I had not ever seen before. I had the pleasure of walking through it with two people who know an awful lot about this, certainly know far more than I do. Stephen Kasher, who did a phenomenal book, one of the earliest, most comprehensive books on civil rights photography, and he was just wowed by it. And Howard Greenberg, the New York gallery owner and dealer who represents some of these people, they were knocked out by it. So it's getting plaudits from everywhere, and I would encourage everyone to see it. The Race Beat, I will talk for a few minutes about that, and I'm going to try to integrate for the first time in my life some photographs into this thing. And of course, my PowerPoint didn't quite work, but Kevin upstairs is going to try to help me on that. But let me just tell you a little bit about the Race Beat. Not so much the book, though it is also about the book, but what the Race Beat was. It begins not in the South, and it begins not in a newsroom. It begins in New York City with the Carnegie Corporation. The Carnegie Corporation in the mid-1930s looks out across America, and they're feeling that there's one big issue that America hasn't dealt with. They've beat back the devil of the Depression, or at least they're on their way to that. They have won, what was then World War I. Did they call it World War I before there's World War II? Cecil, you can tell me that. Did they know there was a second one coming? We'll get to that. And I'm showing that my youth, maybe, I wish. But they said, but the big issue that America hasn't dealt with is the issue of race. And they wanted to explore it. And so they brought in and wrote a blank check to Gunnar Myrdal, the Swedish economist, paired him with Ralph Bunche, and gave them all the money they needed and 125 researchers. And they said, go south and study the mentality of race and racism and race relations in the South. And what they produced was a 1,483-page book that's just fascinating. about all the habits and quirky behaviors and, of course, the hardcore, what they called pathological race discrimination in the South. And they wondered, why is it that no one knows about this? I mean, certainly there was some knowledge, but there seemed to be a nation in denial about that. Certainly no one in the North was paying much attention. In the South, those who were in the majority, the whites, it was not to their benefit even to raise this issue, except a few did, a few courageous ones. And the people who suffered under it had no voice. They had a voice through the black press, I should add that. But the black press did not have influence in centers of power. And so the Race Beat explores the black press in pretty good detail from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and on into the 60s. And the Race Beat, the book, marches through history from the time of this formulation of this idea of a book on race relations, the Murdahl's book, An American Dilemma, and that came out in 1944 after 6 years of research, all the way through 1968. And it is a story ultimately that is a very positive story. Murdahl believed fundamentally, after all this research, that Americans were good people, that they believed in fairness and they believed in justice. They could be easily misled. They could go astray. Demagogues would rise and take them off into the wilderness, and they did. But at their core, Americans were good people, and if they knew the facts, they would act on them. And when he said, why don't Americans act on this awful discrimination? Why don't they rise up against it? And he decided it was because they were ignorant. And they were ignorant because the press was silent. Again, the black press was writing about it, but that wasn't influencing white America. The northern press in particular, he said, is going to have to come south and see it, because only the northern press will be shocked. In fact, shocked and shaken was the exact words they used, if they come south and see what is going on. And that is actually what happened. That is how the Race Beat ultimately changed the way America thinks. I do want to talk about some of the photographs, if I can. Is that a good thing to do here? And then when we get to our discussion, we'll, because I think this helps tell some of the story. I just want you to look at this. This is in 1957 in Little Rock at a theater. Segregationists were not the best spellers in the world. They got integration wrong, and I guess that's succeed. I'm not sure, it's not a word that a lot of teenagers don't use now. But I just want you to see it. This is when they brought Birth of a Nation back into Little Rock. In Little Rock, something really important happened. Up until Little Rock in 1957, the black press was the only press really covering the story. The New York Times was in the South. They had come in the South in 1947 with a man that some of you, I believe, here knew, Johnny Popham. But Johnny Popham did not like covering the race story. And he wrote long letters saying, please don't make me cover this story. It's my people at war with themselves. And he also had a very rosy view of how things were going to turn out. And he missed the rise of massive resistance. And he missed the rise of passive resistance. So pretty much the black press was the only one telling the story up until about Little Rock. And then let's go to the next image here. This man right here has a real key figure in our book early on. Alex Wilson, a man of great urbanity and a man of great rectitude, and he was the editor of the Tri-State Defender in Memphis. And he, on the day that the 9 Little Rock students were enrolling at Central High, he and 3 other African Americans, a photographer and 2 reporters, were walking to the school when they were attacked, because the Little Rock people knew that if you take out the press, you take out the eyes and ears that will inform the nation. And I just want to click through the next few shots here. He gets knocked to the ground. Okay, go ahead. He gets up. He's 3, 4, 5 times he gets up, creases his hat and puts it on, maintains his dignity throughout. Go through it again. They just keep attacking him. Go one more. If you look, the man on the far right has a rock in his hand. You can see. This guy's jumping all over him. These pictures were taken by a photographer named Will Counts. And you have an image in your show by Will Counts. Will Counts was an interesting man, shot for the Arkansas Democrat, was at birth was he had a breech birth and had a left hand that didn't really work. He would have to lift his hand up to hold his camera, and he did some amazing work, photojournalistic work in Little Rock, and no one really knew that he had this hand issue, and he never talked about it. Actually, it was more his arm. But he did some amazing work. Okay, let's go one. There he gets kicked. Okay. He gets up again, and he's trying to walk through. They're coming after him, the guy behind him, the Elvis guy with the fist. Okay, one more. Well, I think we missed one in there, but that's probably one that got missed when I didn't do my PowerPoint right, where he gets kicked right in the groin, and it's just this very powerful picture. It's in the book. This is a fellow, Ernest Withers. Now, the High has a special relationship with Ernest Withers' photography. They've got quite a few of his images, not just civil rights, but also of Memphis and the music scene in Memphis, and black Memphis in the 1940s and 50s. Ernest Withers was a pretty amazing guy, just died about a year and a half ago. And this is him in Little Rock, and you get a sense of the equipment that he was carrying. Let's click on through. This is in Anniston. This is in the show as well. And I brought this for one reason. This is a bus in Anniston that burns in 1961 on Mother's Day. The man in the middle with the black jacket on is a man named Moses Newsom. He was a reporter for the Baltimore Afro-American. He had covered the Emmett Till trial. He had covered Little Rock. He had, and he would later cover the Ole Miss James Meredith incident. He was on the bus, and he felt like he barely got out with his life. He and Simeon Booker, a black reporter, he left behind his camera, and it broke his heart that he left behind his camera. And he couldn't just go back on there. At some point later, he did go back on there and retrieve it, or maybe it may have retrieved it through the police later. I'm not sure. And the next picture shows you Mr. Newsom with his charred camera. He was able to retrieve it. Let's go to the next one. This is an important one, and we may talk more about this, or I may go ahead, Brett, and steal the thunder of that. This is interesting. This is in Birmingham in 1960 during the Freedom Rides. And what's interesting is that you have a group of Klansmen there to try to attack the Freedom Riders, and an African-American man who just needed to, who was down there meeting his fiancée, who was coming in on a bus. She was not a Freedom Rider. He ducked into the men's room, and when he comes out of the men's room, he's mistaken for a Freedom Rider, and the Klansmen attack him. Now, Birmingham at this stage is, as Harrison Salisbury for the New York Times described it, it's full of fear and hatred. Harrison Salisbury for the New York Times had spent a lot of time in Moscow, and he had concluded that things were as bad or worse in Birmingham. And so he had written the story for the New York Times that had as its headline, "Fear and Hatred Grip Birmingham." And it led to a lot of libel suits against the New York Times and Harrison Salisbury. But I want to tell you the impact of this photograph. There that day, taking pictures, was a photographer for the Birmingham News named Tom Langston. And as soon as Tom took this picture, the Klan set on him, and they beat him up really badly, and they destroyed, they thought, his camera. And later, an intern working in the photo department of the Birmingham News was sent back to the bus station to retrieve the camera. He found the camera. The film was intact. They took it back. They developed it. And the Birmingham News, which had been attacking the New York Times for having misread Birmingham, the Birmingham News ran that photograph on page 1, and they ran a page 1 editorial that had the headline that said, "Fear and hatred did stalk Birmingham yesterday." Photojournalism had an amazing impact on that, and they were able to identify who these Klansmen were. Let's go to the next one. You'll see quite a few photographs, several photographs in the show, and I think we may talk more about Charles Moore. If you don't see him right away, it's because Charles Moore blended in beautifully. He's right in the middle of the picture taking photographs. Side comment, and I won't dominate this, but just He's the guy here on the left, the African American, as he is identified by Julian and in the show, is a fellow named Walter Gadsden. Walter Gadsden was not a demonstrator. This is in Birmingham, 1963, in the spring of 63. Walter Gadsden just happened to be down there. He was related to the Scott family that owned the newspapers here, the Atlanta Daily World. And as many of you know, the Atlanta Daily World was not on the same side of this issue as Dr. King. It scolded Dr. King for for being too provocative, for not just sort of waiting a little bit longer to let things percolate. But anyway, the thing that I like about showing Charles Moore here is that he did not use the long lens. He used short-range lenses that meant he had to get into the thick of it. And you've seen the images of him, of his pictures with the fire hoses and the dogs, a lot of pictures that show you how close he was to the action. And there are other photographs, not that I don't have, that show him in the thick of the action, and other photographers just sort of standing along the sidewalk, not realizing what they're missing. And Charles is a wonderful man, still living over in Alabama. Okay, next picture. Here on the right is Charles Moore. But what I really liked about this picture is that the two men on the left were just here last week, because they have photos in the show. Bob Edelman and Steve Shapiro, and they were on the march, the Selma to Montgomery March. And you'll see a lot of their phenomenal work in the show. The guy on the motorcycle there was to run film back and forth so that it could get to their publications. Do I have one more? Okay, and this is the last one. People have asked me many times how we got the photograph that went on the cover of the book. This is in Birmingham in I think 1966. The fellow in the middle is a man named Jim Perks, who still lives in Georgia. And, of course, on the right, Dr. King, Dr. Abernathy, and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth from Birmingham. And the little story behind the story as to how that got on the cover of the book was that the publisher had put another picture on there that we didn't particularly like. It was about 5 or 6 white guys in white shirts with their sleeves rolled up, smoking pipes, and it didn't really capture what I thought was what the book was about. It looked like the Cuban Missile Crisis. You've seen those pictures, the guys like this, trying to advise what to tell President Kennedy. And so we vetoed that one. And then they gave us a cover that had a lot of different photos on there, but some were black and white, some were color. They were too small, didn't read well. We rejected that, but we had nothing to show for it. One of the people I loved in this book, a guy named Cliff Sessions, died about the time that we're rejecting the photographs. There is a Washington Post obituary on him, and I happened to be quoted in the obituary about him. And someone saw that, and he sent me an email and said, my name is so-and-so Perks, P-U-R-K-S. And if you're doing a book on this, you probably met my cousin, Jim Perks, who was really important in covering the movement for AP. And I thought, I've never heard of Jim Perks, and I'm feeling embarrassed that at this stage of my book, there's somebody out there I don't know. He copied Jim Perks. Jim Perks then writes me an email back that says, well, my cousin has inflated and always has inflated my importance in covering civil rights. He says, I was a nobody. He says, but I did have it was important to me that I had a chance to cover the movement for a few years in Birmingham when I was with the Associated Press. He says, and really mostly what I have are my memories and my reporter's notebooks and this great photograph. And I said, may I call you right now? And he said, sure, I'm in Americus, Georgia. And so he provided me this image, which I took out of an old frame that had been there for years, not knowing, Julian, you'll kill me, that I did this on my breakfast table, taking it out and thinking, what if it's stuck to the glass? But it wasn't. And I scanned it in and sent it to New York, and they loved it, and that became the cover of the book. The impact of the photojournalism was was not by any means eye-opening to me. When we can go into more detail and connect some dots. But the detail of it and getting behind the scenes and the stories truly opened my eyes to things I didn't know in the same way that the exhibition here does. So thank you very much. I appreciate it, and we'll go to the next stage, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Hank, for warming us up. That's great. One of the motifs of Hank's talk was the notion of the commitment made by photographers, how they put themselves, and reporters, of course, but since we're here to think about photography, the way that these individuals put themselves in harm's way to bear witness to history. And Doris Derby is one of those people. You're going to hear her talk about her work. She has been the director of the Office of African American Student Services and Programs at Georgia State since 1990, and in the 1990s she also held the title of Adjunct Associate Professor of the Anthropology Department. She has a BA in Cultural and Social Anthropology and Elementary Education from Hunter College in New York City, a master's degree in Cultural and Social Anthropology and African Art from the University of Illinois, Urbana, and a PhD in Cultural and Social Anthropology and African American Studies, also from the University of Illinois, Urbana. She has had a wealth of experience in such varied positions as an elementary school teacher, museum curator, sales promoter, public relations director, television production assistant, and a manager of arts and crafts cooperatives. She has traveled extensively in Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean, and presented numerous professional lectures and workshops, and she is the recipient of many awards for her work. She's held a variety of offices in professional organizations and has worked with local, national, and international communities, non-profit and volunteer organizations, including, just as a small example, the Atlanta chapter of the Lynx, the NAACP, the Coalition of 100 Black Women, the American Association of University Administrators, and so on and so forth. One of her most important roles, I feel, in the city of Atlanta is her role in Sistography, a collective of African-American women photographers based here in the city. And, of course, most relevant to tonight's program, she's a veteran of the 1960s Southern Civil Rights Movement, most specifically in Georgia and in Mississippi. Her photographs documenting the movement have been exhibited all over the country and in many local institutions, and have been exhibited widely here in Atlanta, including at Georgia State, at the Auburn Avenue Research Library, Atlanta Fulton Public Library, Mason Mura Gallery, and at Emory University. And very importantly, recently Emory acquired her papers and documents, and so there's a major archive of Dr. Derby's life's work at Emory, which has only recently arrived there through the great skills of the curator there, Randall Burkett, but that will be a major resource that will be mined by future scholars. And I do want to say, of course, that Dr. Derby's photographs are in both the present exhibition and in the permanent collection of the High Museum. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Doris Derby.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Julian, for that great introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of the panel tonight. Tonight's topic of discussion centers on the role of the media in covering the civil rights movement. The purpose of my presentation is to acquaint you with the role the media played in my life's journey. I will illustrate through words and photographs an unforgettable and far-reaching journey. I will touch on 4 primary aspects of that journey, and they are as follows. First, there are 3 photographs that were taken in Birmingham, Alabama, that galvanized me to say, yes, I can, and I will work in Mississippi in the freedom struggle as a literacy teacher, with adults who wanted to register to vote and participate in other activities in the democratic process that were their birthright, but they were denied because they were told they had to read the parts of the Constitution, or they had to jump other hoops, and they needed to learn how to read and write. Second, there was the development of a grassroots media organization called Southern Media Incorporated in Jackson, Mississippi, of which I became an integral part. Third, there is the body of photography work I generated as a photojournalist, some of which is in the current Civil Rights exhibition at the High, as Julian said. And fourth, there were the promotion and marketing experiences I had with the national media, radio, TV, newspapers, and magazines, as a spokeswoman for the self-help economic and educational initiatives in Mississippi. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been exposed to a photograph that impacted you for the rest of your life? Please raise your hand if you have. Well, I was too. In fact, there were 3 extremely impressive photographs which I saw on television in May of 1963. And these are all currently in the Road to Freedom exhibit at the High. These photographs actually impelled me to make the decision to go to Mississippi to teach in the Adult Literacy Project established by Bob Moses, the voter registration director of SNCC in Mississippi, SNCC being the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of which I am proudly, was proudly, and still am proudly, a field secretary who earns $10 a week for about 8 or 9 months. Just the previous month, I had declined Bob Moses's offer or request. He said, you know, he thought, oh, I was a teacher, and I had worked in the civil rights movement and the Northern Students Movement. Why don't you come to Mississippi and work in the Literacy Project? It's a new endeavor. And I said, I don't think so. But after seeing the violence of the dogs, the hoses, the billy clubs, and the bravery of the young black youth, I said the least I can do is teach literacy and voting skills for 1 year. And I ended up staying for 9 years, organizing, teaching, managing, promoting, demonstrating, and yes, becoming a media person. The photos that were etched in my memory, those 3, let's see, we'll see on the screen. And as you saw, this is one photograph by Bob Ailman, another one by Charles Moore, which Hank just mentioned about, and the other one with the dogs attacking the young man. I was looking at TV, and I saw this, and I said, you know, I just can't believe this. I have to do my part. And so that's how I ended up going to Mississippi in 1963, August, right after the March on Washington. The second impact the media had on me was what led me to join Southern Media Incorporated, a company founded by 2 Northern black filmmakers whose goal was to train the Mississippi black community, especially the youth, to learn the skills to control their own documentation in still photos, film, lighting, sound, and 35 millimeter filmmaking, production, and editing. The wide range of civil rights struggle activities were photographed. Will be depicted in this PowerPoint and used for community organizations and individuals, for the nationwide media, for legal and educational purposes. And here is a brochure on the Southern media. Can we have the next? Okay. Now, Southern media. Now, you saw the pictures of the photographers with their cameras around their neck, and that's me. And now you only see one camera, but I actually carry three also. And there's one on my other arm, and I had another one in a bag. So the thing is that Southern Media was a group that we went to various organizations to document that what they were doing. So here we have, as it says, Southern Media was not a government-funded program. It was an affiliate of the Poor People's Corporation. And over the years of 1967, 68, through 1970, we had about 25, 30 persons who went through this program. And we went, for example, and documented the Grand Marie Vegetable Co-op in Lafayette, Louisiana. That's me out there making movies. And here we are learning editing skills. Liberty House Co-op Management Meeting in Jackson, Mississippi. This is a group that I worked with from 1965 to 1972. And as you can see, I was a multitasker. So I wasn't just working with one group at one point. So I was working with Southern Media, Liberty House, and also the co-ops, producer co-ops. We had the self-help economic initiative to train mostly women how to make various crafts, and then we have the marketing co-op. We would have the women leaders to come to have monthly meetings and learn about business and enterprise and co-ops, and so we were making films about this also. Now the thing is that we would provide photographs to any organization that wanted their photographs for brochures, film strips, or whatever they wanted. And so that was the important purpose of this community organization. At the same time, we also provided photographs to the media, to newspapers. If a journalist came to Jackson, we also provided photographs for them. Here we have a youth being trained. One of the things was regular reading of manuals relating to photography. We didn't just stay in Jackson or in Mississippi. We went out to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago and covered that. That's me over there. With the members of the Mississippi Loyal Democrats, where Fannie Lou Hamer gave her great speech. And then we also covered the regular Democrats. I don't know if you know about the Loyal Democrats in Mississippi in 1964, 65, challenged the regular Democrats because, you know, blacks couldn't participate in the democratic process in Mississippi. Blacks couldn't vote. They couldn't participate in any Democratic Party activities. So there was a challenge, and then it was led by Fannie Lou Hamer that the loyal Democrats should be seated as opposed to the Mississippi, the regular Democrats that were segregationists. The third way the media impacted me was that I developed an archive of thousands of photographs that documented the political, cultural, educational, artistic, economic, media, and legal aspects of the civil rights movement, focusing on Mississippi and especially depicting the roles of women in these areas as they implemented and supplemented the political movement. The racism and poverty in Mississippi was evident, as was the power, strength, commitment, and determination of those persons involved in the struggle for freedom. My photographs were taken from an insider's perspective because I was a part of the organization. And it wasn't a matter of coming in and taking photographs for a short period of time and going back out. So I will show you some of the photographs that I took of the women and their roles. The slides. Okay, here's Fannie Lou Hamer. We're in Jackson, Mississippi. We had the Mississippi Democratic Nominating Convention. I actually made that sign. So that was one of the other things that I did, made signs. And we had some of the politicians there, and Fannie Lou Hamer was telling it like it is. And the movement was integrated in Mississippi. We had Pat Darien, who was finally elected as a committee woman, a national delegate to the Democratic Convention in 1968. She went on to work with Jimmy Carter and several other people. She was very active. She was from Virginia, but she came and she stayed in Mississippi for many years. Now, we had the youth. This was a young SNCC woman from Greenwood. And I remember when I first went to Greenwood, we didn't stay in hotels when movement people traveled around. And I stayed at her home for about a week. Everyone was so nice to open their homes to SNCC people, to the outsiders, even though there was a lot of pressure. And often persons who would house a movement person could lose their job or even have their house shot into. But June Johnson was an example and depicted the strength of the youth in the civil rights movement. She passed about 2 years ago. On the other side, we have the older generation. And these women were just as important as the youth, because a lot of times they said, if I don't do anything else before I die, I'm going to register to vote. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm not afraid. And so I want everyone to see that this woman was just as important as the youth and the role that she played. Here we have another program that I was involved with, was the Head Start program. I was a member of I was a teacher with the first Head Start program in Mississippi. CDGM, Child Development Group of Mississippi. And here we have grassroots organization in action, a concerned mother expressing her the issues that she wanted to have dealt with. And here's the literacy. We have literacy projects. The one that I worked with in 1963 was not the only one. This one was at the Tufts Delta Health Clinic. And here we have another meeting with the co-ops, and there's Dorothy Height. She was a supporter of the co-ops. Dorothy Height, the president of the National Council of Negro Women. That mural in the back was one that a young man and myself worked on in our spare time. And here we see the patriotism of the women in the co-ops. This was a quilting co-op, I believe. This is Merle Evers, the wife of Medgar Evers. Another important role of the women were the attorneys. While most of the attorneys were men, this was Norseth Stewart, who was from Mississippi, and she went away, and then she came back after she graduated from law school and joined the movement. And I believe she's still there. Another role that women played was fundraising. Here we have Julie Prettyman, who was the manager of the New York's Friends of SNCC office, and I worked with her before I went to Mississippi. And she did a lot of fundraising because, there were a lot of demonstrators and a lot of jail-ins. And she is the sister of Alvin Poussant, Dr. Alvin Poussant. And she was the one who influenced him to go to Mississippi and to head up the Medical Committee for Civil Rights for a few years. And finally, we have Charlene Hunter Gault. As you know, she is a media person. She integrated the University of Georgia in Athens. And I just heard her on the radio yesterday. She is in South Africa, and she's still doing her thing as far as reporting is concerned. Finally, the fourth impact the media had upon me can be seen in the way the Northern media so graciously and expeditiously responded to the requests for media coverage from 1967 to 1969 by the grassroots organizations called the Poor People's Corporation and the Liberty House Marketing Co-op to publicize our self-help, economic, and educational initiatives. I had started working with them in 1965, as I mentioned, and continued until 1972 when I left Mississippi. Reverend Robert Libby, head of the Division of Radio and Television of the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, arranged for me to have over 56 appearances on radio and television from 1967 to 1969 to speak about the Mississippi movement. Appearances were on shows from New York to California, with syndication amounting to 200 to 400 radio and TV station appearances, and the newspaper and magazine write-ups were almost as numerous. I had an opportunity to be on the Today Show, Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs. That was really exciting. In conclusion, as you have seen, the media played a very significant role in my life in 4 ways, and certainly in the lifeblood of the movement, wherein several of the photographers whose works are shown in the current High Museum exhibit, as Hank Klibanoff mentioned, risked their lives to visually inform us of the total picture of the civil rights movement. The audience may want to look back, as I did, at your own life's journey and think about how the media has influenced your life and knowledge of the struggle for civil rights. And I believe the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. After you see the Road to Freedom exhibit, I think you will wholeheartedly agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Derby. Joining us on stage now is Dr. Brett Gadsden, who's an assistant at the far end of the table here. Dr. Gadsden is an assistant professor of African American studies at Emory University. He gained his undergraduate degree from James Madison University in Virginia, his master's degree from the University of Massachusetts, and his PhD from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. His doctoral dissertation, Victory Without Triumph, School Desegregation in Delaware, 1948 to 1978, is under contract to be published by the University of Pennsylvania Press. Portions of it have already appeared in the Journal of African American History. Dr. Gadsden has been the recipient of numerous academic grants and awards from the Smithsonian Institution, the American Historical Association, and the Delaware Heritage Commission. And he was recently named as a National Academy of Education Spencer Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow for 2008-2009. He's lectured extensively, and his teaching interests include African American history, African American social and political movements, civil rights history, the history of education, and African American political and social thought. Tonight, Dr. Gadsden will lead the discussion with our two presenters, Hank Klibanoff and Dr. Doris Derby. So please join me in welcoming Brett Gadsden.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Julian for inviting me to participate on this panel. I was a bit intimidated, actually reluctant to participate. I thought, my goodness, what do I have to contribute in the presence of Doris Derby and Hank Klibanoff? And so I kind of bowed out and asked to kind of moderate or co-moderate the panel. But I took a tour of the exhibition last week, and I was struck by the amazing images that I saw, and for me it resonated in ways as a professor who teaches the civil rights movement, because I think it's really difficult to convey often to students the kind of power of the movement and the great risks that individuals took to perfect our democracy. And I think that I was encouraged by the work and greatly impressed by the exhibition. I think it's a wonderful compliment to a lot of work that's out there already. And in the tour with Julian, I was just struck by the power of the images, and it awakened in my mind numerous questions. Now, I must warn you, I approach these photographs not as a kind of expert on photography or cultural studies, but as a social historian. I feel most comfortable with legal documents and administrative records. And so, for me, I have a lot of questions that pertain to kind of what's kind of behind the picture and the kind of the political economy of the picture. And so it's in that kind of light that I'd like to ask the presenters this evening a couple of questions. And to Mr. Klibanoff, the first question I would like to pose, and I was struck by his book and by the images, was the kind of relative roles that African American and white photographers played in the movement. And I guess I was interested in the extent to which did they see different things? Did they have access to different places and positions that enabled them to get at different kind of photographs that then kind of resonated throughout American political culture?
The answer is that they did. And if you start in 1955, which was the year that Emmett Till was murdered in the Mississippi Delta, and two things, one really critical thing happened after his body surfaced in the Tallahatchie River. And here's a kid, 14 years old, who'd been killed 4 different ways. He'd been beaten to death, he'd been shot, he'd had a cotton gin, fan wrapped around his neck, and then thrown into the Tallahatchie River, which would have killed anybody. And then he was drowned in the river itself. So, and when his body surfaced, it was indecipherable. He had to be identified because he was wearing his father's ring. It had LT for Lewis Till. His body makes it to Chicago, where his mother sees it, and she declares quite courageously and presciently that this body needs to be viewed by everybody. And so at the wake and the viewing for Emmett Till, she demanded that the casket be opened. Jet magazine, a fellow David Jackson, took a picture that Jet magazine ran.
And it was shocking. And the Johnson family that owned it did not allow this to be reproduced by anybody else. And so even on the limited publication of Jet magazine, it was this catalytic shock across black America. And David Jackson was an African-American photographer, that there was some special access there that even if whites had wanted to be part of it, they wouldn't have been able to. And African-Americans had access to African-Americans in ways that white reporters didn't. Also in Little Rock, Daisy Bates, the organizer of the Little Rock Nine, her home became, the Grand Central Station of it all, and that's where the black reporters not only visited, but many of them stayed there. And they had access. You had to read the black press to find out that one of the Little Rock Nine, or any of them, what their career aspirations were. Because as wonderful as the Little Rock, the Arkansas Gazette newspaper was, and progressive as it was, and it won 3 Pulitzer Prizes that year, I think it was 3, and they were very, they put a lot of pressure on Eisenhower to come in and intervene. As progressive as it was, they really didn't cover the black community. So through that, they had access. As time went on, the black community welcomed white reporters. They understood that white reporters had access to the national media. And, I said earlier the New York Times, squandered the first 10 years, but after 1957, beginning 1958, they took control of the story. It fell into the hands of Claude Sitton, who lives not too far from here and still lives over there in Oxford, Georgia. He took control of the story and became the gold standard, and he and Carl Fleming of the Newsweek, they were all welcomed into black homes, and there became a greater mix than there had been earlier, and it was none too soon because the black reporters were not able, after Little Rock, to gain access to sort of the white-controlled main story.
Let me just ask you another question, and there's a lot of discussion today about the role of the press and its objectivity. And I wonder, and when I was looking at these images, I thought, I imagined, I was trying to imagine what was going on kind of behind the scenes and what kind of discussions was taking place between reporters and the movement leaders and stuff. And I wonder if we can understand a degree of collaboration between the black press and the movement itself. Not that they acted as a kind of propaganda organ of the movement, but maybe something more subtle.
I think it was going on. It was a little bit more benign. It worked for both of them. Mm-hmm. It worked for both sides. Dr. King in later years was brilliant at understanding that if he were to hold his demonstrations in the early morning hours, certainly before noon, at a time when the technology was such in many parts of rural South that television reporters couldn't get their film easily to New York to get broadcast on the evening news, that if he had it early in the morning, that there was a greater chance that film could be flown to New York mm-hmm. and broadcast on television that night. Beyond that, I would say there was a mutual understanding, particularly through Dr. King's forces, that if we allow them in, this does us more good than it does harm. And I can tell one story that later became important in in Selma, 1965. There was a photographer named Flip Schulke. And Flip, I'm sad to say, just died about 2 weeks ago. Flip was shooting for Life magazine. Flip Schulke had greater access to Dr. King than just about any other photographer. He shot for Life magazine. When he was down in Selma, one day he took a picture. Here, he took a picture of. He was taking pictures. And he sees a sheriff's deputy on a horse come and start attacking a 14-year-old kid, a black kid. And Flip Schulke is outraged. He's gone through his own personal journey on all of this, and he is outraged. And he puts his camera down. He lets it fall to his neck, and he goes and he stops the sheriff's deputy from attacking this poor kid. Dr. King is livid, and he's not livid at the sheriff's deputy. He is mad at Flip Schulke, and he confronts him that night. He says, don't ever do that again. He says, my people have been getting beat up for 200 years, and I'm having trouble stopping it. I don't see how you think you're going to stop it. He says, but there was one way you might have been able to stop it, and that is if you had kept taking pictures. But now, because you put your camera down, the world will never know what that sheriff's deputy was doing. And I thought that was a very telling story.
Let me just ask you one more question about the impact of the media and the way that it shaped the opinion of policymakers and particularly the white public about the merits of the claims that were made by the movement.
Well, let me tell you just one specific instance that you may know. If you've read the book, it's in there, but if you haven't, then this might be new information. You saw the picture of a couple of pictures we have of Birmingham, May 1963, when the dogs are unleashed and they attack all the young people who are coming out of the 16th Street Baptist Church, and the hoses are unleashed on them. That weekend, that was on a Friday, okay? And now that weekend in Washington, D.C., the Americans for Democratic Action, obviously you may know them, I'm sure you do, very liberal organization is meeting in Washington. They're very upset with President Kennedy. President Kennedy has not manifest the liberal credentials that down here many people thought were evident, but many people didn't think. And he was pandering in some ways to Senator Russell and to Senator Eastland and to some of the other Democratic senators from the South. And he had not been as forceful on civil rights as the Republicans. And those of you who lived through that remember, the Republicans were the reform movement for civil rights in those years. They were the party of Lincoln. It was Senator Javits was leading the way. So the Americans for Democratic Action have scheduled a meeting with Kennedy on the Saturday. And they are going to give him some grief. They have an agenda. We're not pleased with what you're doing on unemployment, labor, education. They had the whole list. Well, as they're waiting to meet with him on that Saturday morning, they're sitting outside the cabinet room. They've got the New York Times and they've got the Washington Post. And both of those newspapers have played at uncharacteristically disproportionate size and quantity the photographs out of Birmingham of the dogs and the hoses. And as they're waiting outside the cabinet room, they decided to change their plan. And they walked into the cabinet room for their meeting. They said, Mr. President, we would like to withdraw the agenda we submitted to you. And he looked at them curiously. And they put those newspapers down in front of him. They said, Mr. President, we only care about one thing this morning. What are you going to do about this? And Kennedy, a little caught off guard, but recovered. And he spoke to the issue of how, the damnation that should befall Birmingham for the behavior that was going on there. And within 3 weeks, he was on national television with his first ever civil rights speech. It happened to also be the night that George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door, which was also the same night that Medgar Evers was assassinated, just to give you an idea of how condensed all these things were. But those images out of Birmingham no doubt propelled him to decide he was going to get on the right side of the civil rights movement.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Derby, I have a couple questions. I was particularly struck by the focus of your photographs, and what I saw was a focus on documentation. It was really striking that you seemed to be so moved by the pictures of Birmingham, the hoses and the dogs, but that in the photographs that you take, there's less emphasis on what I see as kind of protest that we kind of commonly understood as being kind of a constitutive element of the movement. I wonder if you could speak to that difference of emphasis, I think, in the work or the photos that shaped you so, and the work that the photographs that you took.
Well, I knew that there were other photographers and journalists out there taking all the pictures of the violence and the demonstrations, etc. And I was a part a working person with all these various groups that I took pictures of. And I thought it was very important for us to see that the average person was participating in the civil rights movement in so many different ways and making a difference. Because after all, we are talking about educating the youth. The participants in the Head Start program, the first in the country, that took place in Mississippi. And we needed to see that. That was a model that, programs all over the country soon developed. And we needed to see people being empowered and taking things into their own hands in various ways to see that once, the publicity was gone from the particular area, we could see that people would be engaged in their own self-help activities. Whether it was, for some people, the way that they could do it was through educational initiatives. For others, it was economic self-help because, as I mentioned, many people lost their jobs because they were willing to go down and register to vote, to walk, in a line, a demonstration, have mass meetings in their church, hold mass meetings, participate in mass meetings. Look what happened at the Birmingham bombing. That church, that was a mass meeting, and mass meetings were going on all over the place. That was the way that we reached the grassroots people, through mass meetings. What would you do at a mass meeting? Sing, you talk, you see, plan and strategize, but there'd be people, policemen and Klansmen, et cetera, waiting outside to attack various people, or when they got home, they would be attacked. Or, as I said, they could be kicked off the land because many of the people in Mississippi, rural Mississippi, were sharecroppers. So they were involved in self-help initiatives wherever they could be, where they could fit in, and what, in terms of where their head was. And so I thought that was very, very important. Because after all, once people came in and left, they still had to do what they needed to do. And what you saw today was just a drop in the bucket in terms of the photographs that I have. There were many other organizations or groups that I participated in. The Free Southern Theater, I was one of the 3 persons who founded the Free Southern Theater in 1963. It lasted for about 18 years. The idea was to have repertory theater and have young people involved in writing the scripts, producing the plays, acting. Denise Nicholas was, who you may know from In the Heat of the Night. She was a young woman who came down from Detroit, Michigan, and she was dating the editor, a young black man from Cleveland, Ohio, who was the editor of the Mississippi Freedom Press. And Gil Moses, John O'Neill, who was also part of the Literacy Project, and myself decided to found a Free Southern Theater. And that's where Denise Nicholas first had her 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years in the theater. And then when she left, she later on got into film. So this was a training ground in every area of the arts, the legal profession, various aspects of education, economic development, etc.
Thank you. I was struck by the representations of the kind of everyday work that communities do, right, to sustain themselves. And I thought about that work in kind of direct as it opposed the representations that were the very racist representations of African Americans that were forward in movies like The Birth of a Nation. I was struck by the fact that The Birth of a Nation is kind of resurrected, right, around the time that African Americans are beginning to agitate increasingly for civil and human rights. And I was wondering about this the power of self-representation and the ways in that, ways in which that informs your work and your photographic work in particular.
Give me the question.
Okay. This often happens when I get excited about something. I apologize, but I think that about the power of self-representation and what that means to kind of a people who are struggling, right, for equality, and so I wonder how that informs your work. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, to portray, and the importance of portraying African Americans as more than, D.W. Griffith's kind of beasts, but teachers and nurses and just everyday people whose humanity is what makes them ultimately beautiful and worthy of it.
Well, it was very important to depict the various ways that Black people were helping themselves. I remember when I worked in the Head Start program in Holly Springs, Mississippi. We didn't, since it was the first Head Start program and it was just starting in June of '65, we didn't necessarily have very many supplies. So one of the things that I did, utilizing my camera, I took pictures of the activities. I was a teacher, a resource teacher, and I took pictures of all the activities with the kids. I developed them, and then I asked the children about the pictures. I wrote down what they said, and then I prepared books for the kids with their own words and their photographs. So that was starting what we're talking about, the power of representation, self-representation, from a very early age. And later on, the other centers utilized the book, and it was just really important to have the images. Later on, we did get other books, but I just did that. Even, for example, we didn't have very many toys or equipment out in the yard, so I got old tires and all kinds of found objects, you might say, and we made equipment. So I guess I grew up in a family where we utilized everything. And as some of my office staff know, I'm into recycling. And so I think it's that you can do what you need to do with what you have at hand, even if it's only yourself. So,
can I add one thing to because, and I think you'll know this better than any of us. You cannot overstate how important that contrast was, the kind of work that she was doing, and within the community to see images, positive images, or just everyday working life images of African Americans with African Americans doing what they do. You did not see that in the mainstream press. I can guarantee you didn't see it in the Jackson, Mississippi newspapers. The Hedeman papers were the absolute most racist newspapers in America. They were also just terrible newspapers, I have to say, just bad journalism, But they would go out of their way in ways that would sicken you, to belittle and demean every positive achievement by an African American, and there was no imagery. The Birmingham papers, all those images of Birmingham, the hoses and the dogs, you've seen them. You've seen them a million times. They were all over America. I just told you they were on the New York Times front page, Washington Post. They were all over America. They were in Life magazine, page after page after page. Guess what they did at the Birmingham News and the Birmingham Post-Herald? They did not run a single photograph of anything that happened at Kelly Ingram Park on those days in the Birmingham newspapers. I've said this joking, but it may be true. You can go through, and I did go through the microfilm of all those newspapers, Birmingham papers, all those days. The only time you would have seen a picture of a dog was if it was the pet of the week. in the Birmingham papers. And the news stories were never on page 1. They'd always put them on page 2 and 3. So there was a real effort to sort of block this from the public view, and yet what Doris did helped overcome that within the community that needed the uplift, and it had a terrific impact.
Yes, and we provided the photographs for all kinds of community organizations to make their brochures, their film strips, which were, at that time into film strips. We encouraged local people to run for office, and many times they won because the blacks in the majority. And so we furnished photographs, headshots for whatever people needed. We were there as a resource for whatever the community needed. But at the same time, I wanted to document all aspects of what I was involved in, whether or not they used it. So, as I said, I have thousands of photographs that now I want to get out. I've had...
You also have thousands of fans here. I brought your fan club with you, which is great.
Can I just add one point? Sorry, Doris. And it's that the implications of the history that Dr. Derby is speaking about haven't really fully been realized yet, because it's not part of the history that people are reading. So I think that, at least I'm not aware of that. Dr. Gadsden might know differently, being an expert in civil rights history. But, that we're 40 years on, but there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of, broadening the history that we all are exposed to in terms of properly understanding this era. I think we shortly need to open up questions from the floor before we move to a book signing. There's a microphone coming around. If you'd like to direct a question to one of our guests, please do.
First of all, I'd like to say, answer your question. They referred to the First World War as the Great War because they had no idea that we were going to be involved in a Second World War. The second question is, do any of you ever think we'll reach the point in the history of this great constitutional republic when we can refer to ourselves as Americans instead of Scotch Americans and English Americans and Irish Americans? And number three, what can the white people do for blacks now that we're not doing already? What is it that we're not doing?
Well, I think that there still are a lot of things that need to be revealed. There is still discrimination going on, and the media still has a role to play in that. Educational facilities and educational initiatives, also, we need to have more input into what is happening in the educational scene and how it affects young black children. There's still a lot of discrepancy there. I think that Obama is one that we can all get behind. I think that he will be a great asset to this country to address the kind of things that you're talking about. We need to get behind him because he would be good for this country. It would be a big change, and I think it's something that we need.
I'll add one thing. I'm sorry, I was holding back, but I will add one thing. I'm sorry. And maybe I say this as a parent more than anything else, but it's so important that we pass on, yes, that we have to pass on values, and we all know that. And I think that there's a word that we don't hear much anymore, the word tolerance. But there's something goes with tolerance, and that's this idea of being a critical thinker. Being a critical thinker and asking a lot of questions and not just believing everything that people say. There is so much out there that, you don't need to know that that's what worries me about sort of the decline of newspapers in America. Not that we're so brilliant and smart, but at least there was some professional judgment being applied to the ebb and flow of news, rather than just somebody pontificating. And so teaching people to be tolerant and to be critical thinkers, not cynical thinkers, but critical thinkers, and to ask the right questions before they jump to conclusions, I think it's something that I think will help our society.
Hello, my name is Jared Council. I'm a student at Hampton University, and I'm in Atlanta for the summer. My question is really two parts, directed toward Mr. Klibanoff. From what I understand, northern newspapers initiated the coverage of the civil rights movement. My question is, how soon did radio and TV begin coverage, and do you believe their goal was to attract viewers or to expose injustice?
That's a very good question. Certainly, as I said, the black press was there, but actually it was the northern black press which was being a little more aggressive even than the southern black press. Now, it didn't always manifest it in what we typically think of as civil rights. I mean, some of it had to do with, the enormous influence that the black press and the northern black press had in pushing for Jackie Robinson to become the first major league African-American baseball player. They, more than any other sort of institution, were most persuasive with Branch Rickey in getting Jackie Robinson his day. But the northern press had the reach once and I'm thinking mainstream press, they had a reach that no southern press, even if they had a mind to press for a more progressive agenda, could have ever done. Television, it's interesting to keep in mind. I say that, American Dilemma came out in 1944. I mean, television really wasn't even on the scene till 1948, and very few people had it. The 56 convention was the first one, maybe it was 52, was political conventions weren't covered until then. So, and they really didn't have any influence at all on civil rights until 1957. Radio I know a little less about, but they were, the Mutual Broadcasting Network at the time was pretty, pervasive. But it was 1957 in large part with John Chancellor with NBC News at Little Rock. And they learned some tough lessons in Little Rock. You have a scene in the race beat we're talking about where some of the people will remember there was a CBS reporter named Robert Shackney. And at one point he noticed that his cameraman did not get the action. When Elizabeth Eckford got off the bus alone, she hadn't gotten the call the night before that all the black students are going to meet at a certain place. She was on her own, and you've seen the pictures of her walking to school and these white students behind her yelling, screaming at her, and she got detached from the group. And Robert Shackney for CBS noticed that his cameraman didn't get all the thugs out there with their signs, Dixie this, that, and the other, and so he had them reenact it. Mm-hmm. But immediately everyone knew he had done wrong, okay? But they learned an early ethical lesson on that. But television took off with Little Rock on civil rights and had an enormous impact. I'm going to tell you one quick story. I see we're waiting here, but I'm going to tell you one quick story. 1965, Selma is taking place. It's a Sunday night in the spring of '65. And Americans were doing what they always did on Sunday night. They were watching the ABC Movie of the Week. And everyone here who's of my age or around, remember that we watched the Movie of the Week. And on this particular night, the movie we were watching, was Judgment at Nuremberg. Judgment at Nuremberg about the atrocities in Germany during the Holocaust. But it's more than that. It's a finer point than that. In Judgment at Nuremberg, 4 German judges who represent sort of the German people who claim not to know what was going on are on trial. And it's in the midst of showing this on national television, ABC News interrupts the show and said, "Today, ladies and gentlemen, at the foot of Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, a line of Alabama state troopers waded through on horses and with billy clubs and tear gas and attacked, a group of peaceful marchers." And they showed 13 minutes of what happened. And Americans across the country were spellbound to suddenly realize they were like the Germans. They could no longer claim to be innocent. They could no longer claim not to know what was going on. They'd lost their innocence that night. And that night and the next day, and we talk about it in here, Americans from all over the country flooded to airports to head to Selma. It had this just sort of monumental effect. And it came in ABC, which had always been sort of behind NBC and CBS in covering civil rights. But it was just this electricity throughout the country when that happened. Sorry for taking so long.
Hi, I'm Lisa Perry Jokes, and I'm a Link in the Atlanta Links chapter. And we are so proud of our sister Link Doris, and that's why we have a little something for you. I'm one of the youngest people in the chapter, and once I started researching you, Doris, I feel like I need to bow at your feet. Thank you so much.
We're going to wrap up very shortly, but we do have one more question right here in the front row. So if we can keep it nice and tight, go ahead.
Okay, it's not a question. I just want to say that with all the descriptions that were given of Doris Derby earlier, she didn't mention that she has been such a mentor to people. I dropped out of college in 1968 and moved to Mississippi and met Doris, and she took me under her wing and trained me with Liberty House and prepared me for so many years of engagement and activism, and she did that with so many other people. So she has shared her excitement and her enthusiasm and her commitment with many other people over the years, and continues to do so at Georgia State.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have one more question.
It wasn't mentioned much tonight, but Dr. Doris Derby, her focus doing her work in Mississippi was empowerment of women. She did so much work to empower women during her stay there, and it wasn't mentioned much, but I just would like to mention that her major focus was empowering and helping women to empower themselves in Mississippi in a time where women had no power. And I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you so much.
We do have to wrap it up there. Our guests will all be here available for questions afterwards. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to our guests.